Hey everyone, believe it or not, we are actually nearing the end of our first unit um, because, like I've said before, we kind of just in brief spend some time looking at the kind of technical vocabulary and fundamentals of what comparative politics is so that we can then use those ideas in looking at our different case studies. So we have, yeah, it's been a couple weeks, so we'll be wrapping this unit up. I know it feels like we just got started. And that said, I will have some ways to review for you, such as a quizzes game. And so, but we have a couple more categories of just big concepts here. And I'll actually break these into two videos. So the first is on political attitudes, and then we will have a second on political ideologies, which these two things are distinct from each other, but they can be easily confused. And they are two ways of describing individual views on politics. So our previous lesson looked at our group identities like ethnic identity and like nationalism, national identity. This gets a little deeper into how an individual feels or pursues his politics. So first up, we have political attitudes. Okay, and what's important here is that for political attitudes, this involves the view on the speed of political change and methods to achieve goals. So they take on different ideological content in different societies. Therefore, they are not interchangeable with ideologies. What are ideologies? Ideologies are like your system of belief. Um, we could think of, so prominent ideologies might be like Islam or democracy, to being democratic. It could be that you are, you know, Christian. It's all about sort of your mindset about things about morality and, yeah, what is right and wrong, and what is right and wrong politically. But political attitudes are much more based on the situation that you're in and therefore your approach to changing the situation that you're in, whether you want to, whether you don't, and then how you go about that. And so that's why we have that little image there where it says context is everything. And first up, Creeper, he got his little smartphone, and then Artist with a nice camera there. So that's why context is everything. So here's what we mean by context being everything when it comes to political attitudes. So there are two charts here. Both of these charts represent political attitudes. And they are merely different ways to kind of reflect the reality of what we mean by these approaches, these political attitudes. So here's what we see going on. I'll start with the one at the top. You have all the way on the far left, radicals, and then moving on over to, as we go step by step, we have liberals, and then conservatives, and then reactionaries. And then above that line, you can see you have left, and then the center, and then the right. Well, the reason this is one way of looking at political attitudes is because on the far left, this is where we find radicals. They're the ones who want to change the society most dramatically. Liberals, they want to change it in not only society, and by the way, for all these, but it's changes to the political system. So radicals think that you need to just throw out the whole system. Liberals that, well, we make some changes to this system, but we can use the tools that are already there, but we do want to bring change. Conservatives actually want to preserve the current system. They feel like that it's pretty good. Not necessarily all the policies within it, but the system itself, they say, no, this is how we want things to be. So they might favor some change, but they're not looking to alter the way that politics is done. And then on the far right, you have reactionaries. Reactionaries are kind of arch conservatives because they not only um, want to maintain the current system, they actually want to go back to a former time that was a sort of purer form of that system. And so, and by the way, I will talk a little more individually about each of these, but the idea is a reactionary, yeah, they actually feel like the system has become kind of corrupted over time in terms of how it's being done. So the change that they want to implement is to go back to something purer and, yeah, more in line with what this society says it's meant to be. So that's kind of one way to represent political attitudes. The second way to represent them is by this circle. And this may look a little funny, you don't see many charts like this, but there is a reason here, and hopefully we can see here. At the top, you have radicals and reactionaries, and we put them in closer proximity on this circle, and the reason is both of them are more okay with using violence. Radicals want to use violence or other more kind of radical, more extreme methods to completely undo the current system. Reactionaries say we want to go back to something more stringent, and they're also willing to use kind of more extreme methods to do that. And I should say, not only violence, but it's just that both of those two are kind of more extreme in their attitude toward the current system and what they want to do with it. And then at the bottom, you have liberals and conservatives, and both of those are sort of more moderate, and they're not willing to use violence or extreme methods to get their way. They think, hey, let's work within the current system. Liberals are going to say we want to change it more, conservatives more that we want to preserve it. But in that sense, they're kind of more similar to each other than they are to the ones that are on their same side of this line here. So reactionaries and radicals kind of share some things in terms of their mentality, in terms of how they're willing to bring about the change that they would want. Okay, keeping going. So, whoops, went too far. So, just to get into that a little more, but I wanted you to see it visually. So, radical, yeah, like it says, system is damaged beyond repair. The change that they want is dramatic and revolutionary. It transformed that entire system. May tend toward violence, but not all. And then I have a question mark with peaceful because some radicals would say, no, we have to have violence. The only way to bring the kind of change that we want is sort of total system change, kind of just undo and get rid of everything that's there. And if you try to pursue this peacefully, you are actually not going to achieve the goals that we have. Then liberal, a system in desperate need of repair. So we need to modify it, change it, but this is evolutionary change. Instead of revolutionary, it is evolutionary, meaning we approach that change kind of more steadily, more methodically. And they don't believe in overthrow. They believe the existing institutions can be instruments of change. Next, conservative. So the system is legitimate. It should be preserved, important for order. They're not even sure that change is needed. They think that maybe if you start trying to fiddle around with the system, it's just going to create more problems, more unforeseen problems. And so they want to maintain the current system. It keeps on being slow to switch slides, and then I click too far. And then reactionaries. So the system is unacceptable, but it's not they want to bring something new, it's they want to go back to something old, something that was more pure, more in line with like the ideology that they believe that the system should hold. So yeah, I know I mentioned the word ideology, but it's because they want to just go back to how things have been and what the system is built on. So and yeah, there's their method. They want to go back to that past superior regime and ideal, and they're more willing to use violence. Okay, and you may notice that I haven't said anything particular about like saying a quote, like a communist is more one way or a capitalist more than another, and that sort of thing. And that's because everything about political attitudes is contingent on the situation that you find yourself in at that time. So we're going to look at how this works in two different places. In the US, Canada, Western Europe, a radical, if they want to overthrow and bring a whole new order, a whole new way of doing things, that means they're overthrowing capitalism. So a radical in Canada or the US is likely to be very much like a communist or something like that. And then liberals, well, they want to make some changes, but they're willing to make use of the current institutions. Conservatives, they actually respect the system. They think, hey, no, let's keep things as they are. We want to kind of stave off, prevent these big changes that you want to make. And then reactionaries, um, yeah, they would reject both conservatives and liberals. And notice to mention greater, they would favor greater inequality or hierarchy. So maybe thinking we're going to go back to, yeah, to preserve something that was there before. And that might look like, okay, we used to have an aristocracy of some kind in an earlier time. Let's go back to that. Maybe they think that system works better. In contrast, though, let's think how these political attitudes would manifest in a place like China. So the way things are in China right now is that despite some reforms, in some ways, it's still a very non-democratic regime dominated by the Communist Party. So if you were a radical in China, well, you wouldn't be looking to overthrow a communist system and replace it with communism, right? You'd be looking to overthrow a communist system and replace it with something else. That could be potentially a democratic system, a democratic capitalist system, right? Saying, no, we don't like this, and so we want to completely undo it with something that we think is better. So there we go, that it's very context dependent. Liberals would say, we do want to make changes. We don't like the way this whole communist model is set up, but we think we can reform this from within and engage the current political systems. Conservatives would say, no, we like things the way they are. We don't really want to bring change. We want to preserve this communist system as we have it in place right now. But then finally, reactionaries, well, they would strongly oppose any threat to communist rule, and they would be neo-Maoists, meaning they want to go back to how Mao Zedong would have thought of things, how his view of society and government and everything. We could call them hyper ideologues. An ideologue is someone who very strongly believes in an ideology. So they would say, no, others might kind of be a little more pragmatic, say, yeah, well, we believe in communism and the way things are to an extent, but we can be pragmatic and compromise and sort of play around with the way we do things ultimately. These people say, no, no way, I'm not doing that. We have to stick to who we are and say need to be purists. So you could associate the idea reactionaries with the word purists, that we need a pure system, one that is from an earlier time that has not been corrupted with the way things have gone. So just one more time to look and see the comparison that so reactionaries in somewhere like Western Europe, well, to go back to an earlier time there means something different from going back to an earlier time under the, in China. So, okay, so that's what we see for the idea of political attitudes. I'll end by leaving this chart up on the screen so you can reference that easily. And yeah, hopefully this was helpful, and we will move on to the next video to talking about political ideologies.